A very good morning and warm welcome to this week's podcast. And today we will be looking at Psalm 77. May our thoughts, our words and our deeds be forever acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. Amen. Psalm 77. I will cry out to God and call for help. I will cry out to God and he will pay attention to me. In my time of trouble I sought the Lord. I kept my hand raised in prayer throughout the night. I refused to be comforted. I said, I will remember God while I groan. I will think about him while my strength leaves me. You held my eyelids open. I was troubled and could not speak. I thought about the days of old, about ancient times. I said, during the night, I will remember the song I once sang. I will think very carefully. I tried to make sense of what was happening. I asked, will the Lord reject me forever? Will he never again show me his favour? Has his loyal love disappeared forever? Has his promise failed forever? Has God forgotten to be merciful? Has his anger stifled his compassion? Then I said, I am sickened by the thought that the Most High might become inactive. I will remember the works of the Lord. Yes, I will remember the amazing things you did long ago. I will think about all that you have done. I will reflect upon your deeds. O God, your deeds are extraordinary. What God can compare to our great God? You are the God who does amazing things. You have revealed your strength among the nations. You delivered your people by your strength, the children of Jacob and Joseph. The waters saw you, O God. The waters saw you and trembled. Yes, the depths of the sea shook with fear. The clouds poured down rain. The skies thundered. Yes, your arrows flashed about. Your thunderous voice was heard in the wind. The lightning bolts lit up the world. The earth trembled and shook. You walked through the sea. You passed through the surging waters, but left no footprints. You led your people like a flock of sheep, by the hand of Moses and Aaron. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. The occasion of the profound sadness in the first part of this psalm can be inferred from the thoughts which brightened into hope in the second. These were memories of past national deliverance. It is natural to suppose that present national disasters were the causes of the sorrow which had completely enveloped the psalmist's spirit and suggested issues of despair, only saved from being blasphemous because they were so wistful. But it is by no means follow that the singer is simply the personified nature, for the piercing tone of individual grief is too clear, too sharp, especially in the introductory verses, to allow that. Rather more likely, the psalmist has taken into his heart the troubles of his people. The public calamity has become his personal pain. But what dark epoch had left its marks in this psalm remain today uncertain. The psalm falls into two distinct parts, the first of which, verses 1 to 9, find themselves wrapped in the deepest gloom, while the latter, verses 10 to 20, sees the clouds of gloom breaking and glimpse of sunshine falling to earth. Each of these parts fall into three strophes, usually of 3 verses, but in the concluding strophe consisting of 5, and the pause stands at the end of the first and the third, not being present at the end of the second, because it is more closely connected with the third than the first. In like manner, the first strophe of the second part, verses 10 and 12, has no pause, but the second has, and the closing strophe, verses 16 to 20, being in this way parted from the other. Our psalmist's agitation colours his use of language, which fluctuates in the first 6 verses between expressions of resolve or desire, verses 1, 3 and 6, and a simple statement of fact, 2, 4 and 5. He has prayed long and earnestly, and nothing has been laid in answer on his outstretched palm. Therefore his cry has died down into a sigh. He would lift his voice to God, but dark thoughts make him dumb in prayer, and eloquent only in self-pitying monologue. A man needs to have waded through similar depths to understand this pathetic bewilderment of his inmost spirit. Those who glide smoothly over a sunlit surface of the sea know little of the terror of sinking with choked lungs into the abyss. A little experience will go further than much learning in penetrating the meaning of these moanings of lamed faith. They begin with an elliptical phrase, which in its fragmented character reveals the psalmist's discomposure. My voice to God evidently needs some such completion as is supplied, and the following verb suggests that the supplied one should express wish or effort. The repetition of the phrase in the second part of verse 1 strengthens the impression of agitation. The last words of that clause may be a petition, give ear, but they are probably better taken as above. The psalmist would cry to God that he may be heard. He has cried, and as he goes on to tell in a calmer mood in verse 2, he has apparently not been heard. He describes his unintermitted supplication by a strong metaphor. The word rendered stretched out is literally poured out as water and is applied to weeping eyes. There is another instance of this in the Lamentations of Jeremiah chapter 3 verse 49. The Targum substitutes eye for hand here, but that is commentary and not translation. The clause we render without ceasing is literally, and did not grow stiff. That word too is used of tears, and derivatives from it are found in the passage just referred to in Lamentations, and also in chapter 2 verse 18 of the same book. It continues the metaphor of a stream, the flow of which is running unchecked. The application of this metaphor to the hand is harsh, but the meaning is plain, that all night long the psalmist extended his hand in the attitude of prayer, as if open to receiving God's gift. His voice rose like a fountain day and night, but brought no comfort to his soul, and he bewails himself in the words which tell of Jacob's despair when he heard that Jacob was dead. So rooted and inconsolable does he think his sorrows, the thought of God has changed its nature, as if the sun were to become a source of darkness. When he looks up, he can only sigh, and when he looks within, his spirit is clothed or veiled, i.e., wrapped in his own melancholy. In the next strophe, verses 4 to 6, the psalmist plunges yet deeper into his gloom and unfolds more clearly its occasion. Sorrow, like a beast of prey, devours at night. Every sad heart knows how eyelids, however wearied, can refuse to close as upon wearied eyes, which gaze wide opened into the blackness and see the most dreadful things there. This man felt as if God's finger was pushing up his lids and forcing him to stare out into the night. Buffeted as if laid on an anvil and battered with the shocks of doom, he cannot speak. He can only moan as he does. Prayer seems to be impossible, but to say I cannot pray, would that I could, is surely prayer which will reach its destination, though the sunder knows it not. The psalmist had found no ease in remembering God. He finds as little in remembering a brighter past. That he should have turned to history in seeking consolation implies that his affliction was national in its sweep, or regardless of how intensely personal it would have been in its pressure. This retrospective meditation on the great deeds of old is very characteristic of the Asaph Psalms. It ministers to them in many moods, as memory often does. On this psalm today, we have it feeding two directly opposing emotions. It may be the nurse of bitter despair, or of bright-eyed hope. When the thought of God occasions but sighs, the remembrance of his acts can only make the present more doleful. The heavy spirit finds reasons for heaviness in God's past and in its own. The psalmist in his sleepless vigil remembers other wakeful times, when his song filled the night with music and awoke the dawn. Verse 6 is parallel with verse 3. The three key words, remember, muse and spirit, recur. There musing ended in wrapping the spirit in deeper gloom. Here it stings the spirit to activity by questioning, which the next strophe flings out in vehement number and startling plainness. It is better to be pricked to even such interrogations by infliction than to be made torpid by it. All depends on the temper in which they are asked. If that is right, answers which will scatter the gloom are never going to be far away. The comparison of present national evils with former happiness naturally suggests such questions. Clearly the casting off spoken of in verse 7 is that of the nation, and hence its mention confirms the view that the psalmist is suffering as a result of public calamity. All these questions mean substantially the one same thing. Has God changed? They are not, as some questions are, the strongest mode of asserting their negative, nor are they, like others, a more than half assertion of the affirmative. But they are what they purport to be, the anxious interrogations of an afflicted man, who would be sure that God is the same as ever, but is staggered by the dismal contrast between now and then. And so he faces with trembling the terrible possibilities, and however his language may seem to regard failure of resource or fickleness of purpose or limitations in long-suffering as conceivable in God, his doubts are better put into plain speech than lying diffused and darkening like a poisonous mist in his heart. A thought, whether it be good or bad, can be dealt with when it is articulated. Formulating vague conceptions is like cutting a channel in the bog for the water to run out. One gets it together in a manageable form and the soil becomes drained. And so we come to the end of the despondent half of the psalm, finding the bringing of a distinct speech of the suspicions which floated into the singer's mind and made him miserable. The pause bids us dwell on the questions so as to realize their gravity and prepare ourselves for their answer. The second part begins in verse 10. and comes with an obscure and much commented verse, of which two explanations are possible, depending mainly on the meanings of the two words sickness and years. The first may mean anything from my wounding to my sickness, and the latter is by many commentators taken to be an infinitive verb, with the signification to be changed and by others to be a plural noun meaning years, as in verse 6. Neglecting some minor differences, it is possible to say that those who understand the word to mean changed explain the whole in this way. This is my wound, my misery and my sorrow, that the right hand of the Most High has changed. But the use of the word in verse 6 for years creates a strong presumption that its sense is the same here. And as to the other word, its force may best be seen in reference to a closely parallel passage in Jeremiah 10:19. I said, truly, this is my grief, and I must bear it. But the word for grief, although not quite the same as in the psalm, is similar. And so the most probable meaning for the expression is, this is my affliction, sent from God. I must bear it with resignation. Then follows an elevating thought expressed in its simplest form, like an exclamation. I will remember the time when the right hand of Jehovah had the preeminence. The revolution in feeling is abrupt. All is sunny and bright in the last half, and what has made this change? Recognition of two great fundamental truths. First, that the calamity has been laid on Israel and on the psalmist as a member of that nation by God. It has not come about because of that impossible change in him, which the bitter Christians had been suggesting. And second, we have the unchangeable eternity of God's delivering power. That second truth comes to him as with a flash, and the broken words of Psalm 10 part 2 hail the sudden rising of a new star. The remainder of the psalm holds to the thoughts of the great deeds of God in the past. It is an example of how the same facts, remember, may depress or gladden according to the point of view from which they are regarded. We can elect whether our memory nourishes despondency or gladness, and yet the alternative is not altogether a matter of choice, for the only people to whom remembering the happy things need not be a sorrow's crown of sorrow are those who see God in the past and are so sure that every joy that was and is not shall yet again be, in more thrilling and lasting form. If he shines out on us from the east that we have left behind, his brightness will paint the western sky towards which we travel. Beneath confidence in the perpetuity of past blessings lies confidence in the eternity of God. The years of the right hand of the Most High answer all questions as to his change of purpose or of disposition, and supply the only firm foundation for calm assurance of the future. Memory supplies the colours by which hope paints her truest pictures. That which has been is that which shall be, may be the utterance of the man of the world, or the devout man who trusts in the living God, and therefore knows that there shall never be one lost good. What was shall live as before. The next strophe, verses 13 to 15, fixes on the one great redeeming act of the Exodus as the pledge of future deeds of a like kind as need requires. The language is deeply tinged with reminiscences of Exodus 15, 1-27. In holiness, not in the sanctuary, in holiness, the question, who is so great a God, the epithet, who does wonders, all come from verse 11. Your arm in the psalm recalls by the greatness of your arm in Exodus, and the psalmist redeemed your people reproduces the people you have redeemed. Exodus 15:13. The separate mention of the sons of Joseph can scarcely be accounted for if the psalm is prior to the division of the kingdoms, but the purpose of the designation is doubtful. It may express the psalmist's protest against the division as a breach of ancient national unity, or his longings for reunion. The final strophe differs from the others in its structure, being consisting of 5 verses instead of 3, and the verses are, with the exception of the last one, composed of 3 clauses each instead of 2. Some believe that the last 4 verses are an additional additive to the original psalm and think they do not cohere well with the preceding. This view denies that there is any allusion in the closing verses to the passage of the Red Sea and takes the whole as a simple description of the theophany, like that in Psalm 18. Surely, though, the writhing of the waters as if in pangs at the sight of God, verse 19, is best understood as referring to the path through the sea, whose waters returned and covered God's footprints from human eyes. And unless there is such a reference, the connection with the preceding and with verse 20 is somewhat loose. But that is not a reason for denying the right of these verses to a place in the psalm, as for recognizing the reference. Why should a mere description of a theophany, which had nothing to do with the psalmist's theme, have been added to it? No doubt the thunders, the lightning, the storm so grandly described here are unmentioned in Exodus, and quite possibly may be simply poetic heightening of the drama, intending to suggest how majestic was the intervention that freed Israel. However, some have claimed the picture as giving additional facts concerning of the Red Sea and its passage, but this is probably somewhat spurious. The picture in the psalm is most striking. The continuous short clauses crash and flash like thunder and lightning. That energetic metaphor of the waters writhing as if panic-stricken is more violent than Western taste approves, but its emotional vigour as a rendering of fact is unmistakable. Your arrows went to and fro is a very imperfect transcription of the Hebrew, which suggests the swift zigzag of the lightning flash. In verse 18, the last word gives us some difficulty, as literally it means a wheel and is apparently best rendered as above, the thunder being poetically conceived of as the sound of the rolling wheels of God's chariot. There are several coincidences between verses 16 and 19 of the psalm and Habakkuk 3 verses 10 to 15. Namely, the expression writhed in pain applied in Habakkuk to the mountains, the word overflowing or tempest in Habakkuk 10 through chapter 3 verse 10. Tally with the verb in verse 17 of today's psalm, and therefore rendered poured out, the designation of lightning as God's arrows. The final verse returns to the 2-claused structure of the earlier part of the psalm. It comes in lovely contrast with the majestic and terrible picture preceding, like the wonderful setting out of the purpose of the other theophany in Psalm 18, which was for no higher end than to draw one poor man from the mighty waters. All this pomp of divine appearance with lightning, thunder, and a heaving earth, a shrinking sea, had for its end the leading of the people of God to their land, as a shepherd leads his flock. The image is again an echo of verse 13. The thing intended is not merely the passage of the Red Sea, but the whole process of guidance that began there amid the darkness. Such a close is considered too abrupt to please some. But what more was necessary? What more could be said in retrospect of God's past acts for the solace of a dark present? It was more than enough to scatter fears and flash radiance into the gloom which had so enwrapped the psalmist. His need search for no further thing, for he has found what he sought, and so he hushes his song and gazes in silence at the all-sufficient answer to which memory has brought to all his questions and doubts. None could more completely express the living, ever-present worth of the ancient deeds of God than the abruptness with which this psalm ceases rather than ends. Glory be to the Father, and to the Son, and to the Holy Spirit, as it was in the beginning, is now, and ever shall be, world without end. Amen.